If you go to a regular website, indeed all the websites of government, you hardly find adequate data. You said it here now, but is it a question of the data is not there, or is not harmonized, or it's not properly aligned so that it can be understood easily?
Well, it's a combination of everything you said, really. In some cases, data exists, but since the priority of the particular ministry, department, or agency is not to gather that data, there's very little attention paid to ensuring that this data is properly harmonized. So the data exists, but it's scattered in different places. I remember going to a particular agency where they had all the data that was required for a particular indicator. And I said, look, why are you not collecting the data? They complained that, well, they had all the papers, the raw papers that should be processed on a daily basis. And they were not processing it. And I asked, why are you not doing this? And they said, well, they don't have the funding required to do this. And I said, you know what, why don't you just give us all the bags? They had many bags of this little sheets of paper. And I said, why don't you just pass all these bags to the National Bureau of Statistics, let's work on it. And they were reluctant. So you have a situation where the system to harmonize data actually exists. The problem is that it's not been properly implemented or followed. And this is because MDAs, sometimes even state governments, statistical agencies would hold back and say, well, would insist on their autonomy or whatever it is, or that they are a federation, and because of that, they will be reluctant in keying in to this system. So the methodology, the process for harmonizing data, the standards, the procedures have all been set in place. The laws are all in place. It's a case where you're supposed to get those responsible for producing this data and transmitting it as it's meant to be to actually do it. And that's where we have that problem. We have a situation where at the MBS, we went around all the MDA statistics units, training them in this process, getting them to understand how to do it. And as soon as we spend time, energy, and money doing this, a few months after, these same people are posted out of the statistics unit, and a new set of people that don't understand the procedures are now replaced. So when you have this kind of situation, you're spending time explaining to people, trying to get them to understand the system, trying to get them to key into it. And as soon as they key into it, normal routine posting of staff takes them out, and brand new people are brought in, and then the process has to start all over again. These are kind of the challenges that the statistical system is facing. And MBS is also facing in trying to coordinate the statistical system as we are supposed to be doing.
Coordinating the statistical system might be a major challenge for you, because if I look at it down here, you're supposed to relate with agencies like the National Population Commission, INEC, all the banks, the CBN. They're all supposed to relate with you. There are issues with, right now, the banks gathering the BVN data of bank customers. The telecom company, I mentioned that earlier, is collecting registration data from individuals. The National Population Commission is planning a census, which is supposed to come up, which was supposed to come up this year, but that is being moved. INEC has data of voters. If we cannot put this all together, how then can we say we're working towards improving on the nation's economy? Because obviously data will be, well, you cannot do without data in improving the nation's economy. So how do we move from here?
I think it's better collaboration. Like I said, the data does exist. You just find a situation where certain elements in the statistical system either refuse to obey the statistics law that spells it out quickly. You have situations where MDAs just don't want to give the data out. They see it as some kind of personal, something personal to them, and it's not. The system is very clear. Different MDAs are supposed to set up their data banks, and once they have collected this data, it's meant to be transmitted to the National Bureau of Statistics as the official custodian. But this is not done. So I think what is probably needed is a stronger political will, a situation where chief executives of many of these MDAs actually do what they're meant to do. And it depends on the MDA. The central bank, for example, has a very close working relationship with the National Bureau of Statistics. So do the National Communications Commission and many other agencies. So there are agencies, when you see data seamlessly flowing, it's because, administrative data that is because there's a very good relationship between the National Bureau of Statistics and that particular MDA. Where you see data is not flowing as easily, and that's because people are playing, are protecting their own agencies and their own interests, despite the fact that the The Statistics Act spells it out clearly that MBS is meant to be the official source of data. Any data that is produced by MDAs that is not ratified by MBS ceases to be treated as official statistics. The laws are all there. It's just a case of ensuring that these laws are followed, and those that are meant to transmit this data are doing exactly what they are meant to be doing.
The question will now be...
That's in terms of the data that's been collected. And in some other instances, data isn't even collected at all because the particular agencies are not given the required funding to do so. So there are two areas where there are the situation where data is produced, but in some cases it's not transmitted to MBS, or is produced using the wrong methodology so that MBS rejects it. And I have to explain that. A particular ministry might choose to use a particular methodology that makes themselves look good, even though that's not the international standard specified by MBS. And of course, no ministry wants to look like they're not doing very well. So they will pick a methodology that makes themselves look good. And now MBS has no interest whether or not a particular ministry is looking good or not. So we stick to what the international best practice rules say. And we insist that all the
Mr.
other
Kale, the MBS is
but
supposed
once
to...
in a while, you see MDAs that want to depart from
If I may
this
come
for
in
their
here, Mr.
personal
Kale.
reasons. And because of that, they can't bring it to MBS because MBS will reject it. And the law says once MBS rejects it, it ceases to be used as official statistics.
But the NBS is meant to midwife this data. Is the NBS equipped adequately or funded adequately? You just talked about some agencies that are not able to provide the data they are supposed to because, one, they either are not properly informed how or what methodology to use, or they are not properly funded. So is the NBS funded or prepared to handle these matters adequately?
Well, MBS is not meant to produce every data across the country. There are two types of data. There are surveys and censuses where MBS is responsible for. And there's something we call the System of Administrative Statistics. Now, in that System of Administrative Statistics is the regular data that a typical MDA produces in its day-to-day life. You go to the airport, you go to the immigration, you request a passport. There are records of that. That's what we call administrative data. Now, that administrative data, that's where the challenge of the statistical system is. In terms of surveys and so on, MBS does that on its own with our budget, and we do that pretty well. I don't think there's big challenges in that area. But in terms of this administrative data collection, which is not actually MBS's, it is the different ministries, departments, or agencies that are meant to collect this data. That's where the challenge is. Now, when I said they are not informed, I said that MBS role as coordinator, we do a lot of training to different MDAs, statistics offices, so they know how to get it, they understand it. I raised the problem I raised was that you can train somebody, spend like 3 months to train a particular set of MDAs, and because the MDA can choose to reshuffle their staff, they often take the person that has been trained out and bring somebody else in. Now, if you bring somebody else in, it means that all the training that we just did has to be done again. So until we get to a situation where it is specified that once you are working in the statistics unit of an MDA, you can't just be posted out, then we'll get a lot more continuity in terms of the administrative data being sent. And that's actually more of a bigger problem. We train them in the collection procedures and so on, but we can't control their posting out of that unit. And that's the challenge that we're facing.
Okay, Mr. Kale, as we wind down, what word would you have for Nigerians? Because there are a lot of them who are tweeting here. Let me read some tweets for you. Shade A says, government needs to fund the Bureau of Statistics. We need data for planning and execution and stop haphazard management of activities. Then Shuaibu Umar says, not only indicators are not properly selected, timely information and capacity to use data or information is very limited. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would agree with the first caller. You can look at the MBS budget over the last few years. I've told you that compared to South Africa, the statistics budget in Nigeria is 20 times less. And I mean, that says enough. As far as the second statement, the capacity to use the data is not really MBS. That's the policymakers. MBS is not a policymaker. We just provide, we see ourselves as the eyes of policymakers. We give them the information to use for their policy. Even when the data is published, there is always a challenge in interpretation of that data, understanding the data. We do as much as possible to ensure that we make the data as easily understandable to users as much as possible. We always try to ensure that whatever data we produce is user-driven. We don't want to produce what people are not interested in, especially when you have limited resources. So at the beginning of the year, we reach out to find out the kinds of data that users want. And we produce, using our limited budget, in a table of hierarchy. This is what most users want to see, and that's what we produce, because we can't produce everything with our budgetary allocation. But in terms of understanding the data and using it properly, I think that's more in relation to the users of the data, the policymakers and so on. We try to explain how the data was produced. We take a lot of pains to ensure that the methodology that was adopted, the assumptions that were made, how the data was collected is put in the report. What we have found, though, is that majority of users, Nigerians, don't actually look and read this, take their time to read these documents. People just focus on the newspaper headline that says X% is this, and they either agree or criticize depending on what their own interests are. But I think if people spend more time reading the methodology, understanding the assumptions between the methodology and they will understand what the data is saying, and it will be easy for them to use it, to understand it, and to implement it.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Yemi Kale, Statistician General and Chief Executive Officer of the National Bureau of Statistics. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Sunrise will be back in a moment for the home stretch. Don't go away.